Hey friends, welcome back to part two. All America Must Know the Terror That Is Upon Us. This is by Dr. Revilo Oliver, and I am invoking the rights of fair use to share and discuss this information with you. So while we get into part two, I would just like to briefly say that all of the information that I'm sharing with you came from everything that my mom had saved and compiled for her entire life. And we would have none of this without her. So, God rest her soul. She passed away December 5th of 2017. And it's just been about 15 months now. I still have not gotten through all of her information here, but I thought in her honor, I would just share a couple of pictures of her. She would probably protest this and is probably shaking her fists at me from heaven, but this is a tribute to what a wonderful woman that she was. So this is her in the late 60s, actually, here. And her name was Debbie. So this is her photo, but much later, she attended Boise State University, and she always had big, dramatic hair. So we'll just leave it right there, and there's a little glare from the light. I'm sorry, but this information that I'm bringing you is by this wonderful woman right here. So, without further ado, let's get into part two of All America Must Know the Terror That Is Upon Us. And specifically, we were discussing how America has this new pattern where they like to intimidate the enemy by withdrawing the stores of munitions or the shipments of munitions to the enemy or the adversary, I guess, if you will. So it was already demonstrated that they had cut off Kai-shek's ammunition supply by just simply throwing it overboard and not sending him any more. So they just had to kind of throw down their weapons and retreat because they had no choice. Same thing happened in Cuba. So Colonel Batista had no ammunition whatsoever because they just seized it. They even went to the docks and seized it. So let's begin. You will also remember that while the Great Betrayal in China was underway, under the direction of such eminent figures as General Marshall and Professor Owen Lattimore, the controlled press in this country was filled with propaganda to the effect that Chiang Kai-shek was a scoundrel and that the communists in China were just innocent agrarian reformers. Oh yeah, they're just there to help. We're just trying to make it better. The same technique is, of course, now being used. The press is once again filled with manufactured reports of the past iniquities of Batista and with glowing accounts of Fidel Castro as an agrarian reformer and the George Washington of Cuba. So Castro was the Washington of Cuba. That's what they're saying. If the American people can be hypnotized by this concerted campaign in the press and over the radio, the situation of Cuba should be properly stabilized in about 2 years. Then you will witness another act in the farce. You will recall that when the communists were firmly established in China, our experts blandly told us, oops, we said that they were... There's a misprint in this book, I apologize. It says, oops, we said they was agrarian reformers, but we was mistaken. These communists after all, ha ha ha. So that was in quotes, but it was supposed to be farcical. Anyway, you get it, sorry. As soon as the Russians have built their submarine bases and set up the launching fields for ballistic missiles in Cuba, our State Department will no doubt again tell us, oops, we were mistaken. But now that launching sites for atomic missiles have been set up within 100 miles of the United States, war is unthinkable, ain't it? By the way, you will probably witness in the next few months the destruction of our only remaining ally in the Caribbean, our only certain ally south of Canada, the Dominican Republic. That was, to my mind, clearly forecasted by the Galindas affair 3 years ago, but it has now been made quite certain by our recent official proclamation issued over the name of President Eisenhower to the effect that we look with great disapproval upon dictators such as General Trujillo. The communist underground is our real danger, and no one can accurately measure its total strength. Its members all vociferously deny that they are communists, and they are so organized that when everything is working properly, no one conspirator can positively identify more than 5 of his accomplices. Louis Boudin's recounts the wry humor that when he had worked himself far enough up in the Communist Party to become managing editor of the Daily Worker and a member of the official party's National Executive Council, he began to fancy himself a person of some importance, until one of his superiors remarked dryly, "Son, all that you have seen is just the periscope of the submarine." On March 3, 1958, Congressman Francis E. Walter published a report that the Kremlin has succeeded in enlisting, at a conservative estimate, more than 1 million Americans. They are at this moment the equivalent of some 20 combat divisions of enemy troops on American soil, troops that are loyal only to the Soviets. In other words, you are now living in a country that has been partially occupied. Unless the American people now make a desperate effort to save themselves, they will, within 4 years, I think, find themselves in the position of the Hungarians when they made their frantic effort to regain their freedom 3 years ago. So history does have a way of repeating itself, and what does this make you think of on American soil now? And what's going on now? It's just shifted from the Soviets to the Middle East. There are 2 basic facts that one must bear in mind when one tries to understand communists. First of all, talk about an ideological struggle is mostly nonsense. No communist except gullible college boys and other children really believes in the doctrine of socialism. Marx's absurd theories are merely a propaganda device, a means to an end. The intellectual process of the communists has been well explained by Czesław Miłosz in The Captive Mind and by Gerhard Niemeyer in his Inquiry into the Soviet Mentality, but they were best epitomized by Duane Thoren. The young American who had somehow escaped brainwashing in his high school and college was taken prisoner in Korea and interrogated for months by the Chinese communists who sought to convert him. He received some attention from a really important communist official, and his native shrewdness enabled him to see that the communists who made the decisions held only contempt for their inferiors who really believed the Marxist propaganda. As Thoren neatly put it, intellects that failed to see through the falsities of communism were so arrested that they were only limited use in the totalitarian state. It is quite incorrect, therefore, to say of a communist, unless you mean that he is a fool, that he believes in communism. Communism is not a theory in which men may believe. It is a conspiracy in which men may participate. So far as communism has an intellectual basis, the basis may be found in the doctrine, not of Karl Marx, but of John Dewey. The communist is the perfect pragmatist. He is a nihilist. He believes that there is no such thing as truth. He repudiates and hates all the traditions and culture of the past. There is no truth, there is no value in the world but the satisfaction of his own whims and appetites, whatever there may be. Intellectually speaking, he is a beast, perhaps the lowest and most dangerous of all beasts. Perhaps the neatest illustration of the intellectual processes of a communist and the jargon that he loves to use will be found in comments made to me by a university president some time ago. I had happened to mention the old ideal of scholarship and learning, disinterested pursuit of truth. I thought that he would at least pay lip service to the ideal, but he interrupted me imperiously. "There is no truth but social truth," he said. "And what," I asked, "is social truth?" He replied quite simply, "It is what it is expedient for a society to tell its members." "And who," I asked, "determines what story is expedient to tell the suckers?" He smiled. "We do." Now, I cannot be certain that the man in question was a member of the communist underground, but the reasoning that he employed is that of a communist mind. There is no truth, there is only expediency. Truth, in other words, is lies. But intellectual nihilism, the repudiation of all concepts of truth, justice, humanity, is not sufficient to explain the terrible energy of the communist conspiracy. That energy is emotional. It is a lust, a craving, a passion. I had my first glimpse of this passion early in my days in Washington. I met a young man who had just come into the army. He looked like an amiable college boy, and as a matter of fact, he had been graduated from law school only 2 or 3 years before. He had been working for the Labor Relations Board, and he enthusiastically described to me the way in which he and his colleagues would raid small American corporations that were inclined to be recalcitrant, seize their books and cart them off, ostensibly for the purpose of photographing them, but actually to force the company, paralyzed by the loss of its records, to submit. I was a little shocked, and I asked, Lieutenant, didn't it seem to you that you were violating the constitutional rights of the American businessmen? He was a young man, and he answered promptly, rights? Why, they're capitalists. When we stand them up against a wall, we will shoot them in the belly. They day longer that way. That was how I first came to suspect the real orientation of communist minds, but only after years of observation, and with help from the illuminating analysis of Denis de Rougemont, did I realize that the young man was exceptional only in the readiness with which he let slip the mask. The true communist, whatever disguise he may wear when he moves among you, is, in the literal and exact meaning of the English word, a thug. That is, a man who has made a religion of murder. Okay, so this is where we're going to pause, and we're going to make a part 3 of the last 5 pages. So thank you so much, and we'll get right on to the next one.